My golden child, brother, drained our parents' savings, so I used their own diaries to make him pay. My brother David was born bathed in golden light, or at least that's how my parents saw it. He was the firstborn, the prodigal son before he'd even had a chance to wander. I came along 3 years later, the quiet, steady afterthought. David was charming, impulsive, and had a knack for creating chaos and then looking so devastatingly remorseful that you couldn't help but forgive him. I was the one who cleaned up the mess, literally and figuratively. When David broke a neighbor's window with a baseball, I was the one who took the money from my piggy bank to help pay for it. When he forgot his major school projects, I was the one staying up late with him, fueled by lukewarm soda and a sense of sibling duty, helping him glue together a diorama or write a last-minute essay. Our parents called it being supportive. I called it enabling. David could do no wrong, and I could do no wrong because I rarely did anything that drew attention. I got good grades, I did my chores, I was reliable. And in our family's ecosystem, reliability was about as celebrated as oxygen, necessary but invisible. This dynamic continued into adulthood. I went to a state school, got a degree in accounting, and built a stable, predictable life for myself. I have a mortgage, a 401k, and a job that I'm good at. It's not exciting, but it's secure. David, on the other hand, chased excitement. He had a dozen once-in-a-lifetime business ideas. He was going to be an app developer, a day trader, a craft beer brewer, a motivational speaker. Each venture was launched with a flurry of passion and a significant investment from our parents. And each one fizzled out within a year, leaving him with nothing but debt and a dramatic story of how he was sabotaged by a business partner or let down by the market. The big one, the crisis that would become his defining narrative, happened about 10 years ago. He'd sunk everything, mostly mom and dad's money, into a boutique hotel project in a town that had no tourism. It was a spectacular failure. He lost it all. He came home, a man in his late 20s, utterly broken, or so he performed. He was excellent at performing brokenness. He talked about his shattered dreams, the betrayal of his business partner, the sheer bad luck of it all. Our parents wrapped him in a cocoon of sympathy and cash. They paid off his debts. They let him move back into his childhood bedroom, and they began a decade-long project of funding his recovery. This recovery looked a lot like not working. He was too fragile to handle a 9-to-5 job. He needed time to find himself again. This soul-searching required frequent infusions of cash, a new laptop to work on his business plan, a trip to Bali to clear his head, a down payment for a new car because the old one was unreliable and stressing him out. I watched as their retirement savings, the nest egg they had worked their whole lives for, was systematically drained and converted into David's comfort. During this same period, my own life was happening. I got married. I had 2 kids, and I was the one who was actually there for our parents. When a storm damaged their roof, I was the one who paid the $5,000 deductible for the insurance. When mom needed extensive dental implants, a cost not covered by her plan, I wrote the check without a second thought. When dad's car finally died for good, I co-signed the loan for his new one. These weren't loans, they were just what you do for your parents. I never kept a tally. I never asked for a dime back. My parents would thank me, of course, but it was always with a kind of distracted air, their main emotional energy reserved for worrying about David. "Thank you, honey. You're so responsible," my mom would say. "It's a good thing you're doing so well, especially with everything your brother has been through." It was as if my stability existed only to serve as a safety net for David's instability. My success wasn't my own, it was a family resource, a backup generator for when the main power grid of David's life inevitably failed. I tried to talk to them about it once, gently. We were in their kitchen, and I just helped them sort through a pile of bills. I saw a credit card statement with a cash advance for $2,000. I knew exactly where it had gone. "Mom, are you guys okay financially?" I asked. "Are you sure you can afford to keep giving David so much money?" She stiffened immediately. Her expression went from warm to wounded. "Michael, how can you say that? Your brother is still struggling. He has been through so much trauma. Family is supposed to help family." "I know, but he's not a kid anymore," I pushed. "He needs to stand on his own 2 feet. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice sharp. "You wouldn't understand. You've always had it easy." That stung more than anything. My easy life was the product of careful planning, of sacrifice, of choosing the boring, responsible path at every turn. It was a life I had built. David's hard life was a life he had chosen, a series of reckless decisions cushioned by our parents' love and money. The conversation was over. I had crossed a line. I was the unfeeling son, the one who didn't get it. A few years ago, while helping my mom clean out her attic, I found something that made my stomach clench. It was a set of old accounting ledgers, the kind with the green and white columns. She had kept them for decades. Inside, in her neat, careful cursive, she had recorded every major expense. And there, under a separate section, was a list of all the money they had given to David since his hotel disaster. Next to each entry, she had written the word loan. It was heartbreaking. She was logging it all, holding on to this quiet, desperate hope that one day, when he was back on his feet, he would pay it back. She was enabling him, yes, but she was also his victim. I saw then that she knew on some level what was happening, but her love for him, her pity, was stronger than her financial sense. I took a few photos of the pages with my phone, telling myself it was just for my own records. But a darker thought had already taken root. I felt like an archaeologist who had just unearthed proof of a long-suspected crime. The quiet before the storm lasted another 2 years. David continued to drift, our parents continued to fund him, and I continued to watch from the sidelines, my resentment hardening into a cold, dense knot in my gut. Then the first domino fell. Dad had a major stroke. It was sudden, terrifying. He survived, but he was left with significant physical and cognitive impairments. He would need round-the-clock care. As if that wasn't enough, the stress of the situation seemed to accelerate Mom's cognitive decline. Her memory, which had been getting fuzzy, became alarmingly unreliable. She was diagnosed with early-onset dementia. Suddenly, my parents weren't the reliable backstop of our family anymore. They were the crisis. The cost of a good long-term care facility, one that could handle both of their needs, was astronomical. I liquidated some of my own investments and paid for the first few months, but it wasn't sustainable. Their savings were almost completely gone. I knew what had happened to it. It had been converted into Bali vacations and new laptops and rent for apartments David couldn't afford. I called a family meeting. Just me and David, at my house. He showed up looking appropriately solemn, dressed in a dark sweater, his face a mask of concerned sorrow. He talked about how awful this was, how much he loved them. He was a great actor. I let him perform for a while, then I cut to the chase. "David, we need to talk about how we're going to pay for their care," I said, laying a folder with the facility's cost breakdown on the coffee table. "It's going to be about $12,000 a month." He looked at the papers and shook his head slowly. "Wow. That's a lot." He looked up at me, his eyes full of practiced sympathy. "Mike, you know my situation. I'm barely scraping by. I can help with visiting them. I can manage their appointments, but financially, I have nothing to give." I stared at him. After a decade of being subsidized, of living a life free of real responsibility, this was his response. He expected me to shoulder the entire financial burden of the problem he had largely created. "So you're saying you expect me to pay for all of it?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Well, you're the one with the successful career," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're the accountant, you're good at this stuff." That was it. The knot in my gut snapped. All the years of resentment, of biting my tongue, of cleaning up his messes, it all came boiling to the surface. "The reason I have a career, David, is because I didn't spend the last 10 years treating Mom and Dad's retirement fund like my personal ATM," I spat. The color drained from his face. His mask of sorrow was replaced by shock, then by anger. "How dare you?" he whispered. "How dare you bring that up now? They helped me because they love me, something you clearly wouldn't understand." "Oh, I understand love, David. I also understand math. And the math says you've siphoned over $200,000 from them since the hotel fiasco." He shot to his feet. "You're a bean counter, Mike. You see life in numbers. I see it in emotions, in relationships. You're cold and heartless, and you're jealous. You've always been jealous of my relationship with them." The argument devolved from there. It was ugly, vicious. We said things that can never be unsaid. He accused me of wanting our parents to die so I could have what was left of their money. I accused him of being a parasite who had bled them dry. It ended with him storming out of my house, shouting that he would see me in court before he gave me a single penny. It was a threat he couldn't back up, but it gave me an idea. The situation was untenable. I couldn't force him to pay, and I couldn't afford to pay for it all myself. The state would have to get involved. I contacted an elder care lawyer, and she advised me that given the dispute, the best path forward was to file for conservatorship and have a court-appointed mediator help us divide the financial responsibility for our parents' care. It was a drastic step, but it was the only one I had left. The mediation was scheduled a month later. We sat on opposite sides of a polished mahogany table in a sterile office building. A kind-faced, professional mediator named Mrs. Davis sat at the head. David had come prepared for a fight. He had a whole narrative worked out. He was the devoted, caring son, emotionally present but financially destitute. I was the cold, wealthy son trying to shirk my duties and hoard my money. He gave a moving speech about his unbreakable bond with our parents and his ongoing personal struggles. He painted me as a vulture. He was very convincing. When it was my turn, I didn't engage with his narrative. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed a binder on the table. "Mrs. Davis," I said calmly, "I'd rather not talk about emotions. I'd like to talk about facts." I opened the binder. Inside were pristine copies of my own bank statements showing the payments for the roof, the dental work, the car loan. Then I turned to the next section. "What's more important, however, are my mother's own records." I slid the photos I had taken of her ledgers across the table. This is our mother's handwriting. As you can see, she meticulously logged every dollar she gave to my brother, and as you can also see, she classified every single one of them as a loan. David stared at the photos, his mouth hanging open. The color had vanished from his face. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Mrs. Davis picked up the pages and studied them in silence for a long time. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. She looked at the dates, the amounts, the neat cursive that spelled out loan. She then looked at the summary I had prepared, which tallied the total amount. It was $212,000. Finally, she looked up, first at David, then at me. Her expression was neutral, but her voice was firm. "Well," she said, "this certainly clarifies things." The ruling came down a week later. It was clinical, brutal, and beautiful. The court determined that David's loans constituted a significant debt to our parents' estate. Therefore, the financial responsibility for their care would be divided proportionally. My contributions were deemed to have been gifts. His were a debt. The court ordered that his debt be repaid by him taking on 85% of the monthly care costs until the debt was considered settled. He was legally bound. There was no escape. He had to get a job, a real one. He had to pay. I visit my parents every other day in the care facility. It's a nice place, clean, bright, with kind staff. It's paid for almost entirely by David's court-ordered contributions. He is forced to work a soul-crushing sales job to make the payments. We don't speak. Sometimes I see him at the facility, and he just glares at me with a look of pure hatred. In his eyes, and in the eyes of some of our extended family, I am the villain. I used our mother's private diaries to ruin my brother's life. But when I sit with my dad and he squeezes my hand, or when I help my mom with her dinner, I know they are safe. I know they are cared for. I did what I had to do. So, I need to know. Am I wrong for using my parents' own records to force my brother to finally take responsibility?